asking for, and I'm still feeling my way through, Mr. Chairman, this board and its process and how it works. But I would like to be in a position in November to go up or down on this issue of whether we go Merced to Bakersfield or move the dollar somewhere else. My experience, on these types of boards is just because you have an action item in front of you doesn't mean that one, you approve it. You could disapprove it, or you could give alternate direction. But I think it's prudent, for the sake of time, which we don't have a lot of, is to at least put ourselves in a position in November to make an up or down decision, and then see where it goes based on the final presentation that's given to us in this other report by KPMG. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't know in what direction we're going to be going at this point, but I just would like to be in a position next month, not to talk about things, but I'd like to be in a position to take action if it makes sense.
Mr. Chairman?
Tom?
I appreciate the comments of everyone today, and yours at the end, Director Perea. I think one of the challenges we have is and I appreciate your wanting to move towards an action on this also, Director Perea. The challenge is just the vast volume of data, some of which we, at least on Bakersfield Merced, is what is being worked on this business case report. I don't have cause to believe as we're sitting here that all of that information is going to even be available by our board meeting in November. And that is, I'm sure, disappointing. However, as I said in the Finance and Audit Committee meeting, I don't think that in the interest of time that we can rush the value and the importance of the data that we're collecting and interpreting. And so without asking our financial advisor to step forward, because I think what I've just said is pretty accurate, I don't think that we're going to have the required information to complete a business case study, which I think ties in with everything that we're talking in this agenda item. We're not going to have that information available from the ETO with a large amount of, with enough time to fairly evaluate it and assess the balance of the information that we need to complete, or they need to complete, the business case report. And I think all of this ties together in terms of which direction staff comes to this board and what action we take.
So, are there any other comments, or I have a suggestion?
I have one more, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Danny, and then I have a suggestion.
I'll try to keep it quick. You mentioned you think the basic issues aren't going to change, but what I've heard up here is we haven't had a time to evaluate it. So I'm going to ask you, is 5 million new riders in the Anaheim-Burbank corridor in the next 10 years an incremental or significant change?
As we've indicated, we'd have to really review that study and see where those came from.
No, I heard that. I heard you,
Yeah.
and I agree with that. But that's not what you said. You said you don't think there'll be any significant change. And I'm saying what I read was pretty significant. And it's only a question of whether you're looking at a percentage increase or a real increase or decrease, or however you want to do it, whether it's greenhouse gases or riders or getting people out of their cars into trains. They're significant. Now, on a large scale, they may be less significant than in the valley where they're doubled, for instance. But that's what I'm saying. When you read this, it leads you to a conclusion that the valley is the only answer. And I'm not saying anything except we have to get from Bakersfield to Merced the most efficient, fastest way we can. I agree with that. But there are other elements that we could do at the same time and get more value for our money than we're getting now. That's my point. And I want to assure Assemblyman Arambula, there's no way I will agree with any project that does not go to Merced and connects to Merced, because everything else that we've done in the valley would be almost worthless.
Just one comment that I think is relevant for the conversations going forward. At some level, this is a key decision for the board on how we move forward, and the board makes that call. But we do exist in the world that's broader than just the board, including the legislature and the governor's office, and all of that is key communication going forward. I'm just going to tell the board from my perspective, and I have been involved in transportation policy for 25 years now, that I think one conclusion you can fairly reach when you read the Metrolink report, you read our ETO summary, you read the ETO final report, you read any other report you want, is that everybody has worthwhile investments that can be made. And what we have to do to transform public transit in California is we have to move forward on expanding the pie that enables us to make investments to get electrified, high-speed rail done, consistent with the mandate of the voters of California, and improve regional rail services in a way where it's connected and better service for all Californians. And so primarily the way we're going to get there is not having a tug of war over existing revenues, but figuring out how we make an sensible, expanded revenue approach work so that we can do this. The problem is when you talk about regional investments in certain areas and the obligation of Metrolink or Caltrain or anybody else, their mandate, their mission, their duty is different than ours. It's different. And so we have to find a way to use not just our resources, but all resources available in the state of California and local resources to build a system that works together. And so it's too simple to say, you know, it doesn't have to be electrified now. We can come down and electrify it later. We can do this in the short term. The answer is we have a different mission than they do. They have a different mission than we do. And we've done shared investments where we can to develop their system in a way that would also accommodate ours. The challenge is we're running out of our money. And there is other money available, and we need to have a broad approach to this that utilizes the best state resources available, not just high-speed rails, but others, to figure out targeted, smart investments to deliver the transit system that people want. The other thing I think is worth noting is that the promise and the potential of electrified high-speed rail connecting cities and regions around California is the idea that it can transform and lift public transit. And you can look at almost any metric you want in the state of California, and public transit ridership has been generally flat. That is an unpopular thing to say, but it's true. It has been generally flat. And if we just continue to make the same investments without changing the game or transforming how these systems work together or what the experience is for the rider, you're never going to change that trend. And so I think these are the complex challenges that are before this board. And what I hope this board can get to is a uniform position on how we go forward to meet our mission, the mission that the voters of California have given us, and make it work in a way where we are well connected with the regional services. Many of you have had the pleasure of riding high-speed rail elsewhere, as have I. And the beauty of it is the speeds between the cities and the regions that you can achieve only through electrified high-speed rail changes the way passengers move. And we see in corridor after corridor people moving from flying and driving to a high-speed system that is then well connected with a regional or local transit system that makes it all work together for the transit rider. That's the objective this board has had from day one. It's been laid out since day one, and it's still the mission that we have to fulfill. There are certainly financial challenges to get there, but there is a path. I just think the pie will have to expand for us to ultimately get there.
Mr. Chairman, it's Bonnie.
Please, go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah, just a quick question about slide 6. In the Southern California corridor, I think it was Brian who said there was an investment of $876 million from SB1. I was confused because I thought SB1 didn't allow for rail, so I didn't know what the investment consisted of.
No, SB1 not only allows for rail, SB1 included the largest public transit investment in the history of the state of California in terms of one funding measure. So SB1 was primarily targeted at two things. One, fixing roads and bridges that were in poor condition and really focusing on improving the conditions of the highway. And two, making a major investment to the tune of nearly $1 billion a year in public transit and transit facilities up and down the state of California. So commuter rail is certainly a recipient of SB 1 dollars, and there's a specified program called the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program that awards grants every 2 years. And the last grant award that came from SB 1 through that program to Metrolink was $876 million, what they call their SCORE program for regional improvements in that area.
Well, it's kind of interesting because that means they've already gotten the investment, the kind of expanded investment you're talking about. I do have one other request, and that is even before the quantitative analysis comes back, if that slide 6 could be developed further so each scenario is consistent and has a very clear number of trains per hour, per day. It's unclear. There were a number of questions about that from my colleagues, and I'd like to see it improved.
We're nodding in agreement with you that you can't see, Ron.
Oh, no, but thank you.
Thank you. We'll try and take this portion to a close and move on to the CEO report. First of all, I want to thank the early train operator and Frank and your team for getting this conversation going in a way that was getting all of the information that we can have at this point on the table and getting some feedback. So I'm glad we did it in 2 stages. What I'd like to ask is that we come back at the next meeting with you will not do the quantitative analysis, but I'd love for Brian and your team to come back and say, here's the timeline with which we believe we will have the information we need that the board is requesting to make an informed decision the way Vice Chairman Richards was describing, not just from this work, but from the KPMG work. I just think it would be helpful for all of us to have clarity about a timeline and when we're going to get to what we need. And I would ask that we do that in a way, Brian, that is not killing the team and our advisors, but as expeditious as possible so that we're delivering against what we know we need to deliver. Is that doable?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would say I think what might be very helpful for the board is not just what's coming. There's 2 things that are coming down the pike that are instructive here. One is we do have a 2020 business plan due in February, a draft that will have to be released, and our intention all along is to incorporate the results of these studies into that as we discuss and describe the vision going forward. So I think that's key. The other thing is there are key point-in-time decisions that are going to be helpful if we're to move forward on certain elements that are coming up sooner. Some of those I'll talk a little bit about in my CEO report. But I think what I can provide is a timeline for key decisions that need to be made for us to continue the work, and then making sure that we incorporate all of this analysis that's going on into a description of our vision in the 2020 business plan.
Okay, and your sense is that those timelines will coincide. We're not going to be late on a business plan as a result.
We're not going to be late on a business plan this year.
Thank you. Okay, thank you again. So, Brian, can we turn